Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Fair Tax Week event on local councils standing up for fair tax, the UK Councils for Fair Tax Declaration. It's really great to see so many of you here, and thank you for taking the time to listen to and hopefully contribute to what's set to be a really interesting discussion today. My name is Antonia Jennings, and I'm one of the Associate Directors at the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, which is a think tank focused on local progressive economic development. I'm delighted today to be joined by Mary Patel, the Networks Manager for the Fair Tax Foundation, alongside Councillor Martin Tiedemann from Lambeth Council, Councillor David Francis from South Tyneside Council, and Councillor Sam Al-Hamdani from Oldham Council. So just to let you know the format of the session and a couple of housekeeping rules. Each of our panelists are going to be giving short presentations followed by a Q&A, and please feel welcome to ask questions in the chat box while presentations are ongoing, and we're going to pick them all up at the end. Just to let you know, the session is going to be recorded, but that's only up to the Q&A section. And it will be available to stream on the Fair Tax Foundation's website following the event. You can also join the Fair Tax Week discussion on social media by using the hashtag #CelebratingFair. So before we move into speakers' presentations, I just wanted to say a few words about the context in which this discussion is taking place. So, of course, this session is taking place during Fair Tax Week, which is a UK-wide recognition of the companies and organisations, including councils, that are proud to promote responsible tax conduct and pay their fair share of corporation tax. The week overall is hosting lots of events and provides a platform to explore the positive contribution corporation tax makes to society. And you can find out more about the other events and the work of the Fair Tax Foundation more generally at fairtaxmark.net. And just before we hand over to our speakers, I just wanted to say a few words about why fair tax within councils matters to the development of our local economies, and specifically also matters to my work at CLES. So tax is often a topic that is in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. And unfortunately, we know that the public sector doesn't have a perfect record when it comes to fair tax. Before COVID, we know that around 17% of public sector contracts were won by companies with a connection to a tax haven, which of course harms our economy by extracting tax receipts as a result of profit shifting. And unfortunately, there's no evidence to suggest that through the pandemic, this situation has improved. And alongside that, we also know that the demand for change exists. We know that over 2/3 of the public say they would rather work for or shop with a business that can prove it is paying its fair share of tax. And our work at CLES focuses on supporting local authorities and the devolved administrations in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, etc., in strengthening their local economies through a model for inclusive economic development that we call community wealth building. And within efforts around community wealth building, we've seen a lot of councils already committed to championing things such as the real living wage, for example, and also broader matters of fair employment and sustainable business practices. What we would say is another key mechanism to promote sustainable business that's not yet being exploited at its full must be pursuing better tax conduct. We know that doing this ultimately benefits everyone by strengthening public services, and because we really don't see this as a partisan issue, but it's a common sense agenda that has support from councils of all political stripes. And of course, tax receipts help fund vital public services such as education, health, social care, policing, and these are the public services that make our society freer, I suppose, fairer, safer, and more resilient. And we would say that we really can't be aspiring to build back better, let alone face the challenges of the future without a properly funded public sector. And of course, zooming out from that, there is a much larger conversation to be had around progressive reforms to local public finance, including, of course, whether council tax is fit for purpose, but also the division of revenue raising powers between central, local, and devolved government, and how all of that aligns to public service provision. However, what I would say is the fair tax declaration is something that is an impactful mechanism that is here today and already making a difference. And we would encourage all localities across the UK to adopt it without delay. And by doing so, you know, you can really promote a groundswell of positive tax practice that crowds in generative organisations along the public sector supply chain. Anyway, that's enough for me. So I'm now going to hand over to Mary to tell you more about the initiative. As I said, Mary is the Networks Manager for the Fair Tax Foundation, and she leads the Fair Tax Foundation's localities activity, working with local councils, business and residents to develop fair tax practices at a local level, as well as policy development to encourage good supplier tax conduct through public procurement. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Antonia. Just before I start, I want to check that my audio is working okay, because it wasn't on a Zoom event earlier. Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm really pleased to be here and have the opportunity to speak alongside 3 of our brilliant supporter councillors and Antonia from CLES about what you can do to support fair tax in your local area. So just before I start, a little bit about the Fair Tax Foundation. So we launched in 2014, and our kind of big mission is to encourage and celebrate responsible tax conduct. You know, and you know, as Antonia has said, you know, tax is one of the key contributions that any business makes to our society, supporting our vital public services on which we all rely. And we know that kind of campaigners and the media have done a really good job of singling out, you know, the bad actors, the ones that always make the press. But, you know, we're here to try and recognise the good ones, and we think that's really important if the playing field is to be truly levelled and made fair. So we need this voluntary excellence by businesses, by councillors, alongside the legislative and regulatory reform. So we offer the fair tax mark to businesses. Last year we expanded internationally, so we now have a new global multinational standard, so we can accredit businesses wherever in the world they are based. We run UK Fair Tax Week right in the middle of it right now, and of course the Councils for Fair Tax initiative, which is what I'm here to talk about today. Just briefly, I wanted to set the context for the bad stuff and the impact that tax dodging, you know, still has. It's still a really big issue in the UK and worldwide, and although the UK has really clamped down on tax evasion and tax avoidance domestically and via overseas territories, there's still a lot more that needs to be done. And we're still seeing huge sums lost that could otherwise have gone to support public services. So it's estimated that the UK loses around £17 billion worth of corporation tax receipts each year from multinational profit shifting. That's just one form of tax avoidance. And I don't know if you can see clearly from the map, but the UK is coded red, which means we fall into a group of countries that lose more than 20% of our corporate tax revenue from multinational profit shifting. I just wanted to touch briefly on why transparency matters, because it's something that we cover in our Councils for Fair Tax Declaration. And people sometimes ask us why. And on the face of it, I think fair tax sounds like it's all about just paying the right amount, but it's also just as much about reporting openly and transparently on profits paid, taxes paid, who owns and benefits from a business. Our fair tax mark standards for business reflect this, and of course so does our Councils for Fair Tax Declaration. And this is because reporting transparently on both of these issues is really key to reducing the risk, not just of fraud, but of tax evasion too. And this morning I was in an event with some of our Councils for Fair Tax officers from councils around the UK, exploring really how we can look into more detail and really scrutinise beneficial ownership and understand who councils are doing business with. And related to this, we've got the UK Public Procurement Bill that's going through the Lords right now, and we're working alongside anti-corruption and transparency groups to really push for better consideration of good tax conduct and beneficial ownership transparency for all suppliers, not just those based in the UK as the bill progresses. Okay, on some good news. Here are some of our brilliant businesses that are really kind of quietly or not so quietly during Fair Tax Week out there doing the right thing on tax. And we've got over 75 businesses have been accredited to the Fair Tax Mark to date, right through from listed firms, social enterprises, cooperatives, large private businesses and SMEs. And we've worked with all these businesses to gain the gold standard in responsible tax conduct. So yeah, I think well, I've said before, we're here in Fair Tax Week, where we're just there to celebrate all those businesses and organisations that are proud to pay their fair share. You know, and tax can often be seen or presented as a burden, and we want to really kind of try and flip that narrative. You know, it shouldn't be, against all the brilliant public services that it helps to support, including those that are directed by you as councillors and council officers. Really pleased to say that we've now got 21 councils that signed up to the Council's Fair Tax Declaration. Yesterday morning it was 20. We were really delighted to welcome South Lanarkshire yesterday, the second council in Scotland to support fair tax. And I think, you know, the more councils that we have on board, the more it shows residents that councils are standing up for fair tax, and it shows supplier businesses that good tax conduct matters. You know, and I think local places really can and should have this role in building a fairer economy for all. It's something the public wants to see too. Our latest polling that was released just last week shows that over 2/3 believe that government and local councils should at least consider a company's ethics and how they pay their taxes alongside value for money and other criteria when, you know, when awarding contracts to businesses. So a bit of detail on what the Councils for Fair Tax Declaration is. We launched it back in 2019. It was on the back of research, and I think Antonia mentioned this earlier, that around 17.5% of UK public procurement contracts between 2014 to 19 went to firms with connections to tax havens. And we think that looking at the data across Europe, that the UK's got likely the highest rate of exposure to tax havens via public procurement. We then went and took some legal advice on what other councils and public bodies can do, you know, within the procurement rules, both to address good and bad tax conduct amongst supplier businesses, because we had councils coming to us saying, look, we want to do more around fair tax. Unfortunately, the legal opinion that came back said it's pretty restrictive and there's not much room for manoeuvre, but there are things that, you know, we knew there are things that councils can do. So we launched the declaration really as this pragmatic approach with commitments based on what councils can do within the rules, doing what they can now and wanting to do more, giving the opportunity. It's a self-certified process, unlike our Fair Tax Mark for businesses. So it's something that councils will sign up to themselves. There's no direct charge from us. So by passing a motion in support of the Council's Fair Tax Declaration, councils commit to good practice in their own affairs. So that's right across taking action on fake social enterprises, where you might be seeing artificial reduction in business rates, ensuring contract workers are paying their fair share of tax, and shunning any offshore purchase of land and property. Another of the commitments is demanding greater transparency of suppliers, and I outlined earlier why that's so important for fair tax. So that's including disclosure of beneficial ownership and the fullest possible report and accounts, so we can see what's going on with taxes and profits. Councils are encouraging businesses they own and work with to undergo assessment for the Fair Tax Mark and joining in with Fair Tax Week celebrations. And then finally, joining our calls for reform of public procurement rules, so that councils can better penalise poor and reward good tax conduct. We're already starting to see the impact of the declaration, with more businesses coming to us as a result of an encouragement from council saying, look, we want to get the Fair Tax Mark. We can see it's something that councils care about. I just wanted to share with you a quote from one of our supporters who couldn't be here with us today, Cheshire West and Chester, you know, just talking about, since they signed up to the declaration, you know, the kind of impact it's had. You know, we recently spoke with some of their suppliers at one of their events. That was a really great way of them putting fair tax on the agenda. And we know that Cheshire and other councils are also putting out information, you know, via their web portals, again, encouraging supplier businesses to come on board with fair tax. You may be here today because you've had an email from a local resident, and that's because just last week our friends at Tax Justice UK launched a new campaign backing the council's fair tax declaration, and that was mobilising their thousands of supporters to contact their local councillors. So thank you very much if you have taken the time to be here today as a result of that, and to come and find out more. So just to conclude, if we can be of any help at the Fair Tax Foundation, please pick up the phone, send me an email. My email address is here. And please also check out all the brilliant work that Antonia and the team at CLES are doing to support local councils on community wealth building, including councils for fair tax. And I'm sure she would be happy to hear from any of you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. That was a great overview, and really good scene setter for the discussion to come. So we're now going to move over to Councillor Martin Tiedemann from Lambeth Council. Martin is the Labour and Co-op Councillor for Clapham Park and chairs the Corporate Committee on Lambeth Council. He was previously Head of Communications at the Cooperative Party and has been involved in the co-op movement for 20 years. Martin, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Antonia, and hello everyone from a slightly noisy Brixton in South London. Apologies if you hear some background noise. It's not really the day to have my windows shut. And thank you for inviting me today. Happy Fair Tax Week. So just to add to Antonia's introduction, I've been a chair of scrutiny in the past. I've recently become chair of corporate committee, which is really relevant to the subject, but haven't yet chaired a meeting. Mostly I've been a campaigning backbencher, and as Antonia said, I've worked in the cooperative movement and also for the Move Your Money campaign for fairer banking. So these are things that I care about, and I'm very proud that Lambeth was one of the first 20 councils, well now 21, to sign up to the Fair Tax Declaration, which we did in September last year. It's not too long ago. I must pay tribute to my former colleagues, Mary Atkins and Anna Burley, who both stood down in May. Otherwise, maybe they would be here. But they were the driving force behind Lambeth passing the motion and committing itself to this journey. And having savvy and empowered backbenchers pushing campaign issues like this has been absolutely crucial. Mary was motivated by her experience working overseas in Malawi and then for another South London council. And tax avoidance obviously affects countries of the global south in devastating ways, and here in the UK too. So her successful championing of fair tax stems from her own passion. And Anna worked in policy in the cooperative movement and now for a public sector trade union. She's an expert in supporting public and third sector. So forging relationships with experts and campaigning organisations provided the expertise and insight that we needed to convince others. And all councils and all parties, I'm sure, have campaigners and experts in their ranks. And I would encourage all the councillors here present to kind of find them and use them. And of course, maybe it's you. So, using that kind of passion and that insight and that expertise to kind of convince others in the council is a critical role of us as politicians. And we also had a cabinet member who wanted to listen, Andy Wilson, who stepped down in May as well, I'm afraid, but he worked in procurement himself, and he knew that research shows that billions of pounds from UK public procurement contacts are won by businesses with connections to a tax haven. That was very important to him. And he said he wanted to make clear that Lambeth strongly supports the principles of fair tax, encourage all contractors to transparently meet their tax obligations, and wants everyone to pay their fair share. That these are quotes from what he said at the time. So in July last year, councillors asked Andy in a public question if he would sign the declaration, and he said he would at full council. So in September at full council, we brought the motion and we passed it. And we signed up and signed the declaration. We committed to leading by example through good practice in our own tax conduct, to not use offshore vehicles for the purchase of land and property. We said we'll promote the fair tax mark, but also go beyond that and now work with suppliers, large and small. So what's happened since? Well, look, we're still on the first steps on this journey, and there's a lot to do with elections, retirements, and a new cabinet member for finance. To an extent, we've had to start again. We've had to win those arguments anew and ensure that we kind of get a renewed buy-in. It's hard. Officers already had their own objectives and can be a little reluctant to add new items to their workload. And for us as backbenchers, we need to return to the letter of our motion in the declaration and ensure their work fits in with those pledges. Some officers have been a bit resistant to attending training and outreach, such as today. And I would obviously really suggest to them, and we will, that the Foundation, that CLES, the Cooperative Party and others provide excellent materials, briefings and support for officers and cabinet members. So a key task for all of us, for me, will be to ensure that they take those opportunities up and that they challenge themselves to do more and do better. But there's lots that we have been getting on with. For Lambeth, signing the Fair Tax Declaration fits within our broader work on responsible procurement and, of course, community wealth building, something very important to cooperative councillors. Lambeth spent £552 million through procurement in 2020. Just over 20% was spent on local suppliers, representing 513 Lambeth-based commercial suppliers. 2/3 of suppliers were SMEs, and a further 7% was spent on third sector organisations. All our contracts expect the payment of the London Living Wage as a minimum and an expectation to sign up to the Healthy Workplace Charter. And a social value community fund has been set up that contractors are encouraged to commit a percentage of the annual contract value to. And we recommitted to that in our manifesto in our all-out elections in May. Worth an estimated £1 million annually, this fund is going to be available to local groups, community projects, people living on housing estates to bid for funding and deliver community projects, which will be really transformative in an area where we've not really seen that kind of money from the public sector reach local projects for the last 10, 12 years. In the latest update to our responsible procurement strategy, we've strengthened it with a greater emphasis on shaping local supply markets, ensuring procurement processes are inclusive, thinking about other languages, for instance, and introducing 10% mandatory minimum social value evaluation criteria for all procurement with a total contract value of £500,000 or more. And we've commenced bringing some large contracts back in-house, not least our leisure services contracts. And this is a key plank of our commitment to use our financial investment to benefit our communities directly. Lambeth's Pensions Committee, which was chaired by former Councillor Burley, has actively pursued responsible tax conduct as an investment consideration via its associated pension funds. I think we've been somewhat of a pioneer in our pensions committee, and this is alongside the work of the excellent work on decarbonisation, something we had to really work on officers to say was even possible, and is now something that officers will go to other councils and say how Lambeth were pioneers. Our next challenge, I think, is going to be to embed, as I've suggested, our fair tax commitments into responsible procurement policies in detail, with large contracts that will mean, among other things, pushing the fair tax mark, but with such a large proportion of our spend rightly being with SMEs and third sector organisations, we need other tools to promote responsible practice. And as corporate committee chair, that will be one of my main focuses for the year ahead. Seen in the chat already, how do we measure, what are the targets? And that's very pertinent, and each council will have to think of what's relevant to its circumstances, as well as looking to the national organisations and campaigns for support. Finally, for those London councils on the call, I would say that fair tax is hugely important in this city. We've got complex and diverse land ownership and a crowded marketplace of suppliers, many with links to offshore ownership and shell companies. London is obviously the financial hub of the planet, so our work can do so much to raise awareness of the broader issue. London councils need to be among the very best at holding contractors to account and encouraging good behaviour. And with poverty in London higher than any other part of the UK, need investment in our public services, and that means companies paying their corporation tax. And on a personal note, my ward of Clapham Park has a really high proportion of residents in council and housing association homes, and many of my constituents are Latin American and Portuguese migrants, many of whom work in cleaning, often for a complex network of contractors servicing the large corporations in the city and in the West End. And I'm from a Latin American family myself, so I see at the front line, the effects of a structure of contractors and subcontractors and offshore investments, and the need for investment in public services. And while it's interesting that the tax justice emails that many of my neighbouring councillors have received lobbying for action on fair tax, maybe the first that they'd heard of this agenda, I've not received from my more, deprived residents a single email lobbying me on this issue. So a task I set myself is to engage all communities, including migrants and those in the gig economy, in these debates and causes, and make sure that the voice of some of our residents on the front line are being heard in the conversations that we have around this agenda, because I think they're integral to it. So that's me, and thank you. I'm really looking forward to hearing the other experiences here, learning lots myself and working together as we move forward on this. But thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, that was really interesting, and a lot of that chimes with our work at CLES, which focuses, amongst many other things, on moving procurement from a standalone department into being seen as a lever for economic development. And yeah, really great to hear your on-the-ground experience around how the sort of fair tax declaration can bolster that wider set of criteria around progressive procurement, whether it be, you know, social value or good employment opportunities, etc. So just before we move on to the next speaker, just a gentle reminder to keep your questions coming in the chat function, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. So next to present is Councillor David Francis from South Tyneside Council. In 2019, David became the first ever Green Party councillor on South Tyneside Council. He is now leader of the opposition and one of 6 Green councillors serving the borough. David is on the board of the Association of Green Councillors. David.
Yeah, thanks, Antonia, and thanks to everyone else for being here too. I'm just going to try and centre my talk around 3 things. Sort of number 1, why I decided to do some work on this, and secondly, how I went about that, and thirdly, give you a bit of an update on what happened. So in terms of the why, I think the starting point is just a fundamental belief in the importance of tax. And, you know, without taxes, it would be impossible to pay for the public services that we all rely on as part of society, whether it's health or social services, education, transport. We all need all of those things. And I think it's about having a balance of sort of rights and freedoms with responsibilities, and having a stake in our collective and cooperative communities. And, you know, for the benefit of all of us, individuals and organisations need to have a stake in society and to contribute where they can, as well as to benefit from being part of a community and a society. So as a Green Party councillor, just to use a parallel, I recognise that in order to tackle the climate crisis, we need system change rather than just individual change. And I see this in a similar way. You know, each of us might make individual choices around what businesses we choose to, you know, pay money to, whether we're online shopping or going for a cup of coffee. We might make ethical decisions on the grounds of the tax affairs of those companies. But obviously at local government level, the scale is much greater, and therefore we can have a more significant impact than any of us can as individuals. So in terms of the how, this section is mostly aimed at elected councillors, though I realise there may be other people attending the webinar, so hopefully there's something of interest here in terms of the process. I made use of the model motion, which is a great thing in my opinion, because rather than duplicating the work that's gone on elsewhere and several people trying to do the same thing in their own way, you can kind of you know, do something that you know is kind of tried and tested, it's worked somewhere else, and the kind of research has been done and the preparation's been done in advance to a large level. I mean, for me as a lone at that time backbench opposition councillor, one of the things I would always do is, you know, check with council officers, see what possible technical or logistical or legal objections might come up, and that again would help me prepare for the presenting this to full council. I mean, as I mentioned, I'm not part of the administration in our council, so at that time I was a single Green councillor, and because of the nature of our constitution, I needed to get some other people on board in order to get this tabled for debate. Luckily, that was no problem, and I managed to get the requisite number of signatures. And then what personally I found useful was looking at other councils that had already done this in the past, and with the opportunity to watch kind of video recordings of council meetings and see what some of the other people had encountered by way of opposition or counter argument, and kind of that helped me, I think, get my head around the possible objections and try and anticipate those and prepare for those. I know I did watch one video of a council meeting in Sunderland, and I was really pleased I did, because there was a number of questions that came back that I thought, if I hadn't thought of those in advance, they might have stumped me. So it was good to kind of do the homework there. In terms of what happened, the motion was accepted and voted through at our full council meeting in February 2021. And I think it's notable that that's the first and only time I've ever put a motion or amendment to full council that's been unanimously adopted without any changes or amendments. And I think that shows the strength of feeling behind this issue. It's a cross-party issue. We've got councillors of several different parties and a number of independents on our council and everyone got behind this and supported it. Probably the easiest thing I've done in terms of resistance in that way, and I think that, you know, as I say, that I think that shows the sort of broad appeal of this. And so as a council that signed up to the Fair Tax Declaration, South Tyneside committed to developing a revised procurement strategy and promoting, you know, social value and ethical sourcing practices. And I think it's also playing an advocacy role, partly through events like Fair Tax Week, and encouraging local organisations to sign up to their own commitments. And, you know, encouraging people to also shop locally, support local businesses and nurture our local economies. Sadly, a quick Google search this morning didn't return any results for South Tyneside Council and Fair Tax Week this year that I could find on the first couple of pages. So this clearly is still a role to play in terms of continued monitoring and advocacy. But yeah, just to give a bit of an overview regionally in the northeast, Sunderland passed this just before we did in South Tyneside. South Tyneside obviously has now North Tyneside, Northumberland and Newcastle. So if anyone's watching this webinar who's in Gateshead or Teesside or Durham, Darlington, you know what to do. If you're not a councillor, contact your councillors. You can use writetothem.com or the Tax Justice UK website. And obviously, if you are a councillor, you know, there's excellent resources there on the Fair Tax Mark website as well. I should say, I feel I had really great support from Mary in particular and the Fair Tax Foundation, including sort of subsequent press coverage to help raise awareness on a wider scale and help spread this whole movement, I guess, through the UK. So yeah, I know that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but that was a bit of the why, the how, and the what. So yeah, if your council hasn't done this yet, whether you're just a resident or a council officer or a councillor, I would definitely say go for it. You know, it should be a relatively easy process because of the great support that's available. So yeah, do your best to get it done in your own areas. And thanks for listening.
Great, thanks, David. Really great to hear your practical experience of moving this agenda forward, and also its, you know, salience as a cross-party issue. So moving swiftly on to our final speaker, Councillor Sam Al-Hamdani from Oldham Council. Sam is the Liberal Democrat councillor for Saddleworth West and Leeds in Oldham, which passed a motion supporting councils for fair tax declaration in 2019. He's a long-time campaigner for more just taxation and helped write the current Lib Dem policy on revising corporation tax and on ownership transparency in UK overseas territories. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good to have everyone here, and it's been really interesting listening to the other speakers as well. I've been picking up some things from what you've said, and I'll come back to those. So why did Oldham approve the Councils for Fair Tax Declaration? We brought it as an opposition party, similar to David, but being blunt about politics, quite often you'll be bringing motions for two reasons. One is to highlight somebody else doing something wrong, or two is because you think this is a good thing and actually everyone should be on board with this. And the fair tax mark and the declaration is absolutely the latter. You know, we got really positive engagement with the leadership of the council. Everyone was on board with the idea, and it sailed through on a really positive level. And what it does is it tries to, Mary alluded to some of the problems, fill a gap. You know, we already have in our procurement policies things on living wage, localism, on the environment, nothing on tax, and there is a real hole there. And I think that's why it's really important that part of the declaration is campaigning for change on the legislation and making it more possible for councils to actively choose who they're working with on the basis of good tax conduct and tax accountability. And so that is why I think, I don't want to speak for the other people who voted for it, but they all did. I think Oldham chose to adopt this. I also think it's really important for places like Oldham. So Oldham is, if you're not too familiar, high levels of deprivation, or it's certainly, it's more than pockets. There are relatively wealthy areas, but there's a lot of deprived areas with high levels of social care. We don't, our council tax levels are high because not huge numbers of people relatively pay, because we've got a lot of people who are exempt. So it's a sort of struggle at times financially. And so why are we wanting to go to companies that do pay their fair share of tax? I mean, theoretically, some would argue that's going to drive up prices. Well, actually, it should be the other way around. They're sustainable companies. They tend to be the same companies who we know that they're going to be working in the right way. A lot of small companies are the ones, small local companies are the ones who are going to pay tax in the fair way, because they're not using those tax loopholes of having overseas ownership, etc. So you get lots of local companies. It sits really well with those other things of localism and environment. The companies who sign up for the fair tax mark tend to be the companies who sign up for everything else. So you get responsible, environmental, local companies are the ones that fit with what the fair tax mark is all about. So I think it really sits nicely with the rest of the agendas that we have. And so what have we done? So we signed it in 2019. We immediately went to our arm's length companies and approached them about, getting them on board. We've introduced a process by which we assess all our suppliers, and we on a regular basis, and also speak to people in voluntary sector. Martin mentioned third sector and getting engagement on that. I think that's really important. So we have that reviewed on a regular basis. And also, we're part of the Greater Manchester Combined Authorities. And Martin talked earlier about how that works in kind of conjunction. I mean, there's a huge budget that we pay into through Greater Manchester and with the other authorities, so we need to work together. But also beyond that, and this was one of the things I found most interesting, Martin talked about pension funds. Greater Manchester Pension Fund is the largest public pension fund in the UK. I think it might be the largest pension fund in the UK. And getting those kind of organisations on board is really important. And that's why it's not just about Oldham approving this declaration. I know Trafford have also approved it. But the more we can get on board in Greater Manchester, the more we can tie into those kind of wider bodies and really drive this. And then just, for councillors out there, it's really good on a political level in terms of campaigning. One of the most useful things for me was just after we'd signed this, the council were talking about signing up with Amazon Web Services. And it was a really handy stick to campaign with and go, I don't want this. And you signed up to say you didn't want this either. Amazon, nasty tax avoiding people. We don't, it's not a good thing. We don't want you here. And we're going to stand up and say that that's a bad thing. So it's been really useful, sort of just practically campaigning and doing the right thing. So there we go. I'll stop there. I think we're running over time. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sam. That was fab, and also really great to highlight the importance of collaboration in this space. At CLES, we do a lot of work with anchor institutions working together, and really find that in tandem, when it comes to their procurement policy, their employment policy, etc., they can have a very sizable impact over their local economy. So just before we stop recording, I just wanted to thank the speakers again and remind everyone that there's still time to join in with Fair Tax Week. You can tweet using the hashtag #CelebratingFair, and on Twitter, the Fair Tax Foundation is @FairTaxMark. Further than that, just to do a little plug for CLES, if you or anyone within your organisation is interested in finding out more about community wealth building, then do feel free to drop me an email, and I'll put my email in the chat. Fab. So if we could stop recording.